Thank you, Martha.
It's being recorded.
Thank you, Martha.
Sorry about that, Jessica. I forgot to tell you to start recording.
No worries.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Martin.
Yes, hi. My name is Martin Emink. I'm originally from the Netherlands. Currently, I reside in Italy, Portugal, and Barbados. I won't tell you my age, so that no one else is obliged to tell their age either. I have worked mostly internationally for international organizations, as Marsha already indicated, in the area of policy, although that referred more to public policy rather than private policy. And I'm really very new to the area of social media. I'm an economist by training and a nutritionist, and I work mostly in food security and nutrition, as well as the human right to adequate food. So I think that's enough of an introduction, I hope. Thank you. I think maybe at this point, can we just very briefly ask each one to introduce themselves? Perhaps in the interest of time, if there's more than one participant of a particular company, one station or outlet, perhaps one person can just speak for all of those, okay? I don't know who would like to start first. Please don't be shy, because we're going to be calling on you during this session quite often, okay? And ask you to participate and share your opinions and your experience, of course, okay? So I don't know who would like to start first to introduce themselves.
Hello, good morning. My name is Diane Fort. I am the Director of Sales and Marketing with the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation, Barbados. And we do have responsibility for communication under that portfolio and some elements of our social media here at the corporation. Today, we're represented not only by myself, but by our marketing specialist, Mrs. Nicole Collins, who is in the meeting as well. And I would have participated in the lead up to this, as Marsha mentioned, and found it quite interesting because it is a challenge for us to try and manage it. So we are truly looking forward to this session this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Who may go next?
I
Hi.
saw Krista J had her hand raised. So okay.
Yes. Hi, good morning. My name is Krista J. Paul. I'm with Starcom Network here in Barbados. I am the Senior Programming Content Coordinator responsible for simply coordinating content among our 4 radio stations here at Starcom. And each has its own personality, basically its own set of demographics, and of course, its own set of challenges and triumphs. And this is for radio. I deal with radio as well as digital media. So looking forward to the session.
Thank you. Who may go next?
Hello, good morning. My name is Farah Banks. I am Director of Information and Broadcasting, Radio and Anguilla. And my colleague, Misha Richardson, is with me in this meeting. She is our Sales and Marketing Officer. Sorry, I'm hearing an echo, and so it makes it difficult for me to speak, but we're very happy to be here.
Thank you. To both of you. Who may go next?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Right, let me see if I can turn my camera on. All right. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
I am Shannon. I am Shannon Lewis. I am from Trinidad TTT Limited. Right. I am the webmaster here. So I oversee the development of the website and implementation of proper social media policies and everything online. Right. So I am hoping that I could take away a lot from this and be able to implement it in this organization.
Thank you. Thanks. Who may be next? I think there's still several of you who haven't spoken yet, All right.
Yep, by my records, there are a few who have not yet spoken. We've heard
Maybe
from
they prefer
Andrea,
to remain anonymous.
yeah, Andrea Bryan Garner.
I am driving back to the office right now. I'm Andrea Bryan Garner from NCN in Guyana. I'm responsible for social media in our social media unit. I'll be joined by another colleague, Latoya, and I think our marketing manager will be joining as well. We're from the National
Please drive
Communications
carefully.
Network. NCN. No, I'm like 30 seconds away, so that's why I'm not looking at y'all, looking at the road.
That's the right thing to do. Thank you. Who may go next? Hello? Hello?
Did we have the representative from Radio Anguilla speak already? Yeah?
Yes, my director spoke on my behalf. But
Okay,
let me
great.
say, my name is Misha Richardson. I am the
Yes.
Sales and Marketing Officer for Radio Anguilla. I've been here for about 3.5 years. So nice to meet you all.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Misha. All right, so I think that covers everyone this morning. Martin, I'm going to hand over to you. I don't know if you want to dive right into the slide or if you want to have them share briefly some of the things they hope to get out of the session.
I think this might be very useful. If perhaps some of you at least very briefly can indicate to us, because we're also learning in this process, what it is that you are specifically expect from this, let's say, this investment of 90 minutes of your valuable time. Perhaps some of you are willing to just share your ideas with us.
Let's start with Ms. Fort. Since Diane shared that about the challenges that they experience, and also I remember during the session with Diane, the question when we went through the questions, there was a lot she had to share about the challenges they face, strictly because they deal with several different types of content. They have radio, they have television, they have different types of radio. So I'm going to hand over to you, Diane, and then we'll move on to someone else.
Thank you, Marcia, putting me right on the hot seat. For sure, we really hope to continue to gain the knowledge that will help us to create a policy that we can activate. We have a framework, but it truly is not activated. And as you rightly said, with us having 3 radio stations and a TV station, you have the challenge of, we have our media, our social media, which is managed and which we can control a lot better, of course. Anything that is published, we have control over. But then you have the challenge of having personalities who may be perceived, well, they are voices and faces of the organization. So when they make certain comments on social media, it can easily be taken as representative of the brand, and could also impact your relations with other partners and advertisers and so on based on what is stated. So while we recommend against it or we try to manage it, it is still a challenge, and there's not a clear guideline that we have. And I think even in reading your framework document, one of the things you said is practice. And because people for so long have been doing things, and in some cases, not in all cases, they get away with it, it slides through the cracks. It is difficult to pull it back. So we want to have a framework where it is understood and going forward as an organization. Certainly, not only for those who are here, but for new hires, this is the policy, this is the corporate position. Yes, you have your rights to individuality, to your own opinions, and to, you know, the freedom of expression, and all these things that we talk about, but it still has to be tempered by an understanding of where you work, the responsibility you have in your role. So I think we just need to get that understanding and that cohesiveness. As they say, there's strength in numbers. And I think when you look at it from a holistic point of view, that this is a regional outlook, this is the policy that we're all looking at throughout the membership of the CBU, then it makes it stronger, to put it to your workers. So let's put it that way.
Thank you. No, I think that already summarizes an interesting number of challenges. And it's good to hear that, companies are aware that they're facing these challenges and that perhaps a policy can contribute to addressing those challenges, and sometimes also opportunities. Not everything is negative. There's sometimes also opportunities to make more and better use of social media, and not just to try to restrict it or somehow subject it to rules and so on. So thank you very much.
Martin, if I could just say, I just want to mention, Martin, I'm happy that you said that, because as you said, there could be opportunities, because sometimes in our fear of of a fear of doing the wrong thing or that thing that may be damaging, we lose the opportunity to be more competitive. I'll just sum it up that way.
Yes, thank you. No, that's very, very true. Is there someone else who would like to just share very briefly what their expectations are for this investment of 90 minutes of your valuable time?
While we're waiting for someone else
mute. Sharon Lewis.
While we're waiting for someone else to volunteer, I just wanted to share that.
Also, several
Hi,
people.
can you hear me?
Several people are indicated as mood. Diane
Are
Ford.
you guys? Hello, are you guys hearing me?
Yes, Marsha.
Okay, great. Thank you. I just wanted to share while we wait for someone else to jump in that what Diane expressed just now came up a lot during the questionnaires, which is persons having their own identity and becoming celebrities in their own right, and what they say being viewed as the company's view. And how do you manage that, because it ties into infringing our freedom of speech. So that's something that came up a lot, and we're obviously going to delve into that today. Is there anyone else who wants to share their expectations?
I would like to learn how, just like what you said with you becoming a celebrity on probably social media, not really a celebrity, but because you always use social media, you become popular on social media, and you sometimes have to I don't know, separate yourself from your company and your personal self. So I would like to learn how to say, okay, hey, my personal views does not reflect the company I work for, and what I say should not necessarily have anything to do with who I work with. So by the end of today's session, I would really like to learn how to use social media in a way that does not necessarily reflect bad on the company that I work for, the organization that I'm a part of.
Thank you, Misha.
Thank you. Marsha, do you think we should maybe start with the PowerPoint presentation?
Marsha, you're muted.
Sorry, I was just sharing the screen. Thank you, Krista J. Can everyone see the screen? The
Yes.
presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
Great.
It's the last slide, but yes.
Oopsie, sorry about that. And let me
sometimes it's better to start at the back than in the front.
I'm just going back to the Zoom so I can mute myself.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead, Martin.
So what we are going to chat about a little bit is how, from a regional policy framework, you may arrive at a company social media policy. Recognize, as already has been said, that not all size fits all. Companies vary in the services that they offer, the fields in social media that they cover, the problems they face, the setting in which they operate. So these are all elements that are important, but may eventually become a specific company social media policy. And as it says there, an interactive conversation, interactive or two-way. In other words, hopefully we can contribute something that increases your knowledge, but we also hope to continue to learn from you. We've learned a lot, particularly Marshall, when she did the surveys and which some of you or perhaps all of you participated, shared your views and your experiences and so on. That was an enormous contribution. And it brings also the point that a policy should always be very relevant to its environment and should be very specific in terms of the problems, the opportunities, as we have said, or the issues that it addresses. What will be in the next slide, as you can see, our talk this afternoon, for me afternoon, for you in the morning, will be sort of 3 parts. We didn't want to make it too long, and again, give up plenty of opportunities for others to contribute and share their views and experiences. There will be a brief introduction and a background, which is sort of the setting for this regional policy framework, and which is based mostly on the surveys that Marcia conducted, which, by the way, are summarized in the appendices of the document. We will cover some of the main points here, but a more extensive expose is available in the appendices of the document you have now. Then we'll look at the regional policy framework from 2 points of view. One, its content in terms of policy content, what it tries to achieve, how it will try to achieve this, but also recognizing that a policy to come to life is really sort of perhaps a 3-way process. First, the drafting, then the implementation, and then the monitoring of company policies. I think we'll briefly talk about that as well. And then finally, we would like to make some suggestions. What may be the next step that each of the companies may consider in working towards drafting, implementing, and monitoring the company social media policy. Now, as I said before, and as you will see in the next slide, all right. There's a certain setting. This is obviously very general in the Caribbean as a region. And some of these points came again from the contributions you made to the surveys. But it did show that there is an expanded use of social media, both for professional as well as for personal use. This is really a trend which I think is not unique to the Caribbean, but it certainly is very prevalent in the Caribbean area. It was also indicated that few of the companies that participated in the surveys had really a policy, or most of them, or that said they had something. It was more in the form of a guideline, but not really a policy. Now, one can think that a guideline is simply saying, well, these are some of the rules, please observe them whenever you feel like it, or something like that. It's not very specific. It's not very, indicative, really. It simply said, well, use your good sense and do well. That's a little bit different from a policy, which is a lot more specific. It lays out a process. It just raise the conscience of people, but it really turns the staff members into active participants in achieving what the policy tries to achieve. Okay, so there is a bit of a difference. And as far as we could learn, none of the companies, at least that participated or representative who participated, had really what we might define as a policy. A few had guidelines. We also problems, which again, I think are not unique to the Caribbean, but I'm not an expert, but that there are specific problems. There is a lot of fake news and misinformation. There is an online bullying for which social media are being used. Social media used to spread hate speech, defame people, and definitely also the distribution of very inappropriate materials, sexual stuff, and all of that. So that is part of the social media setting. And I don't know if anyone feels that there, as I said, more details of that analysis you will find in the document, but we didn't want to take all the time to go through that. If anyone feels at this point that there is a very important point that is not summarized by these three, please share your viewpoint at this point. If not, we will go on to the next. And the next one,
Dr. Martin.
Sorry.
Someone's jumping in, Martin.
Yes,
Hi,
please go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. So touching on the point of fake news, misinformation, hate speech, and defamation, one of the issues that we here at TTT Limited kind of face with is especially hate speech, because we are state media, right? We are basically the mouthpiece of the government, basically. So when we are having live streams and stuff like that, the comment sections usually have tons of hate speech, right? What we try to do is to turn off comments, right? But then there's more backlash where people saying that we're trying to silence the public. Where's the freedom of speech, right? So in one hand, we're having people doing all these things in the comments, and when you limit that, people still find a way to get upset and say we're hindering them from the freedom of speech. How do we, as an organization, get through that?
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, I think it's a very important issue, and what came out in the surveys, and we'll come up to that again, is how do you balance this? You know, the right to free speech, and on the other hand, you know, recognizing there is also something called human dignity, or how can what you say or write damage, let's say, what has been called the, you know, the company brand, or if it's in your case, when it's a government-owned station, you know, how it could create some political feedback that is not positive, or maybe misinterpreted as being just pure propaganda when indeed it is not. So yes, these are very delicate issues, and again, they came out also very much in the analysis of the survey data, as we identified as challenges and so on. So thank you for that. So there are also some, and you will see in the next slide, precisely number 2 is what you already, you know, pointed at, and so on. What may be somewhat unique to the Caribbean area is that many of the countries have a relatively small population, being island states and that sort of thing. And everybody knows everybody, and so on. It's not possible to post anything anonymously or to disavow any, because immediately people will recognize who is the author of something. So now we come to the point that you already brought up, the challenge as to how to preserve and recognize the right to free speech versus any potential damage to government brand or to relationships with sponsors and so on. Where does one find that balance? And I think that's a particular challenge.
Can I jump in here?
Yes.
One of the things that I felt it necessary to mention here, and this is one of the questions that came up in the survey, is whether you had an awareness of your country's legislation as relates to free speech, internet, etc. And when trying to find that balance, that's also something you have to consider in addition to what your company's mission is. Yeah, so you have to balance the two, because obviously your country's legislation is going to supersede, and that's going to be very important. So you don't want to allow anything that breaks the law in the name of free speech. Although free speech is important, you must take into consideration what your law, the law of the land is. Yeah, so I just wanted to jump in to add that.
Okay, thank you, Marshall. Then, we come also to the fact that some stations are government owned or operated or have political, affiliations and so on. So anything that's posted can have, fallout, a political fallout, or a social fallout for that matter. So again, that's a challenge. Where do you draw the line? Where do you find the trade-offs and so on? And something that was already mentioned earlier is, staff, they're resistant to change. I think this is not unique to social media or certainly not unique to the Caribbean. I mean, I think this is everywhere and in any type of company. Staff, some staff resistance to change and so on. So again, this presents a challenge as well. And something that also came out very clearly, again, in the analysis of the surveys and so on. Now, why, let's raise this question. Why a company social media policy? Okay. We have one statement there which says guard against inappropriate use of social media by company staff. Okay. Can anyone think of another reason or other reasons why a company should have a social media policy? I mean, this is rather general, sort of guide against inappropriate use of social media by all, underlined here, by all staff. Can anyone think of another reason why a company should have a social media policy?
I think a company should have a social media policy so that you already have that against inappropriate. If a staff member does something on social media that they're not supposed to do, you can't just say, okay, you're supposed to do that. At least you have a document to back up why they should not be doing what they should be doing. So you, in essence, you have something concrete to reinforce why they should not be doing what they are doing. You just can't put it out of thin air. So if you say, okay, you have to report to this document, at least you have something there for them to report to, as in just saying, we following this, we following X, Y, Z. So that's my take on it.
Okay, I think that's a very important point. Having a policy can be an empowering. It's not only a negative or to tell people what they're doing wrong, but it can also have an empowering quality. People understand better, people are guided better, and they understand why they're guided that way. So yes, that empowering quality that a policy can have, I think is a very important point. Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to?
Yes. Also, when it comes to content, and the use of content, the content that the company would post, how it is handled even by staff, that should definitely be taken into consideration as well.
Yes, in other words, the policy has to provide very clear guidance
Yes.
as to how
Yes.
to use information, how to post information, and so on. So it's a very important guiding document, and it goes a little bit beyond perhaps just guidelines. You say, well, maybe you should think of doing this, or maybe you should think of doing that. It's really a little bit more specific and has that guiding quality. Thank you. Now, why should we have a regional social media policy framework, which is sort of expressed in this document that you have? And we thought maybe what such a regional framework could do is to facilitate coherence in company social media policy. Now, we already said at the beginning, it's not that one size fits all. It's not that all companies should have the same policy or even the same orientation of the policy, because they face different challenges, they're in a different setting, their experience is different, they have different limitations, they may have different opportunities and so on. But a certain level of coherence. Now, what might we understand by in this context? What might we understand by coherence? It definitely doesn't mean all companies have the same policy. Absolutely not. But why is certain coherence may be important among company policies? Does everyone think? What does coherence mean? What may it mean in practice? In practice, in this context? Well, one thing might be, for instance, that staff that leaves one company and takes up employment in another company might find something in the company policy, the new company policy, very different than what they're used to, what they know from experience in the old company, and so on. The other thing is, in the general setting, the challenges that we already said, in the general setting faced more or less by all companies is quite similar. So again, how the policy addresses those challenges and so on will mostly and perhaps naturally flow in the same direction. Okay. The other thing that the framework intends to do is to guide, as we already said, the process of drafting, implementing, and monitoring the company policy. What are the important elements there to consider? What it may be needed in terms of resources? How do you do it? Who is responsible? And so on. We'll go into some of these issues a little bit more further on. Again, to drive home the point, which I think is very important for any policy, drafting of any policy and so on, is the upfront analysis. And so we decided, and mostly Marshall did, do the survey and analysis in preparation of drafting the regional social media policy framework. Okay. And these are some of the points, again, that came out of that under the analysis. And the information on social media accounts is readily available, but often inaccurate. We already sort of alluded to that. So if you're going to use that information, or if you're going to report it somewhere else, and it's inaccurate, that creates obviously significant problems. We already said that social media accounts are abound, unfortunately, with fake news and so on. they can also be hacked, which introduces another risk, another danger, that information is used for wrong purposes and so on. And as someone just said, when we talked about the empowering quality of a policy, staff needs precise rules on how to use the social media information and how to process it. So again, we covered that also. But this again came out of the analysis, and more details you can read again in the appendices of the regional framework document. Also, in the next slide, you'll see that media outlets provide different levels of guidance as to what to post and not to post. And we already said some, we found at least, provide very little guidance or none at all. People sort of left on their own, and have to sort of decide what makes good sense and so on. Some outlets have guidelines, do not really have the strength, let's say, of a policy, company policy that is endorsed from the top down. Okay. Sorry. But the outlets are concerned about what staff post, and particularly when it comes to their personal accounts, because it's often very difficult to separate the individual in personal capacity as to in the capacity of representing a specific company professionally and so on. So what they may post on the personal account would still negatively affect or have a negative effect on the company and its brand and so on. And lastly, in the next one, this also came out from the analysis and so on. There are, again, and we have said this already, concerned about free speech rights, and particularly when it comes to personal social media accounts. So it's clear that there also very specific, perhaps rules, or certainly very specific guidance be provided when it comes to the use of personal social media accounts, which many people feel, well, it's theirs, it's the personal account. So what does the company have to do with it? But the individual cannot be divided into, on the left is the company, the right is the person as a person. So again, guidance there is important. So this is sort of the background, and now we sort of go into policy in general, and eventually to guide what may be the drafting of company social media policies. Now, normally a policy has a vision that says, this is what we expect in the long run, okay, to be in place, to have been achieved, okay? What that long run means, that may vary from time to time, but it's not necessarily a very specific time framework, but it's what we would like to be as the end result of any efforts, including the drafting, implementation, and monitoring of a company policy. This is one idea, which you also find reproduced in the policy document, in the framework document. But it necessarily has to be this. It can be something else than what the company decides. But it may seem reasonable to say that at the end of some period of time, staff at all times make a responsibly professional and personal use of social media to post and access information that is factual, fair, does not harm company interest, and respects human dignity. So these are already some criteria. They sort of qualify, if you like, what the information that is being posted and that is being accessed to be reproduced should contain. Factual, fair, does not harm company interest and respects human dignity. Respects human dignity obviously means no hate mail, no posting or inappropriate information of a sexual content of a person or something like this. I don't know. These are 4 criterion, if you like. I don't know if anyone would like to feel that there should be other qualifications to information that is being posted or being accessed for reproduction, or just discover it more or less. In general, obviously, factual, fair, does not harm company interest and respects human dignity. Anyone like to say anything? I hope everyone is still there.
Yeah, I think this covers it. Basically, I can't think of anything to add to this particular point because it is important for us to safeguard and to operate in integrity and professionalism. Unfortunately, the certain standards are not as common as they used to be. So the policies are definitely needed to guide the standards, even as it relates to who has access to the social media accounts and what is to be posted and so on. So yes, it has to. And as media companies, people look to us for facts. So we have to be factual, we have to be fair and balanced. And we cannot, well, I guess unless you're state-owned, take sides when it comes to certain matters. So yeah, well, I don't know how it is in state-owned media companies. Maybe Shannon can enlighten me. But we have to be fair and let all views contend and let the facts definitely speak. Yeah.
Thank you. I think it's fair. That I think is an important contribution because it puts a little bit more meat on these bones here. What it says there in these 2 last lines and so on. So thank you for that. Is there anyone else who would like to share an opinion or make a contribution? No? Okay, then we go on. Now, a policy usually has a mission. And what that means is, okay, if there is a certain vision, what we like to be there in place at the end of a certain time period, the long-term view and so on, then the question becomes, what is it specifically that the policy is going to contribute to achieving that vision? Because that vision may also depend on other things, not just the policy. It may need whatever, okay? But we are dealing with policy. So the question is, what is the mission of this policy in terms of eventually achieving the long-term vision? Again, these are suggestions. I mean, but we thought something like staff consistently apply practices. Now you see it's already a little bit more action-oriented that result in factual and respectful information when professionally and personally posting to and accessing information from social media. We're having a rather cold weather here, so. So this is just an idea, right? This is not meant to be a straitjacket or in any shape or form. Does anyone wish to comment on this, on what the policy mission may be like? Does this statement leave out anything important, or that you consider to be important? It's a general statement, obviously. The mission, vision statements are obviously general.
I think a lot of it is protecting the organization. And so I believe that should be reflected somewhere in here as well.
Okay, that's a good point. Yes, it sort of was there in the vision statement, but it should be represented again in the mission or statement. Okay, so when you continue on, hopefully, in all of this process in drafting the company specific policy, and hopefully take this important point into account. Okay. Now, after that, we have the specific policy objectives. Now, if you have had a chance to look at the policy, the, the regional framework document, we won't be going through all of that because that's way too long, okay? But the internal structure can be as follows. Policy objective, which is highly specific, and we'll talk a little bit more in detail about that. And then in relation to achieving that policy objective, what we have called a response menu, or if you like, policy action. What really needs to be done specifically in relation to a specific policy objective. Now, if you go through the table of contents of your document, okay, you will see that there are a number of policy documents always followed by a response menu. Okay, so we won't be able to go into all of the details here because it simply isn't time, but hopefully we'll have a chance to go to the document itself and read more of the details. Again, these are just ideas, okay, as far as content is concerned. They're not a straitjacket, and whatever wind up in your company's policy in terms of objectives and policy actions should always be based on the specifics of the analysis that you conduct about the challenges, the opportunities, and so on that your company faces. Okay, so it's not necessarily good to take what this says here, okay, and just copy it into your company policy, because some of these things may not be irrelevant or may not relate at all to the challenge that your specific company faces, and giving the characteristics of the services that you offer and so on. Okay, so that is as far as content is concerned, and we'll go a little bit more in detail at the end with our suggestions. Now, recognizing that to arrive at in company policy that's been drafted, obviously, that has been effectively implemented and that is being monitored as far as is it achieving and so on, involves obviously a process. It's something that happens over time. Okay. Now, it's always good, not because I'm an economist, but to remember that in any of these processes, some resources are allocated or are necessary to make it effectively happen. Okay. Now, for this sort of work, the resource really is staff time. Okay. But that staff time has a cost. Okay. There's an opportunity cost. So it's good to bear in mind when you organize the internal process of drafting it, to always remember that it is staff time that is needed. In other words, individuals who are tasked with drafting, perhaps a committee or some other way, may have to dedicate a certain portion of their time to that, for that purposes. Implementation also and monitoring also. Small funds, yes, materials, photocopies, that sort of thing. But usually it's good to make just a small budget and externalize, what these costs are, okay, to make it very specific. Now, when you're doing the drafting, implementing, and monitoring, and we come back to this point again, also for purposes of sustainability, meaning not just having a company policy and saying, okay, well, that's it. Okay, fine. Now everybody, read it and do your thing. Okay. That certain principles are being observed in that process. Very important that the process is participatory and inclusive. It's not just one or two people, but it really, at all times, other staff members of all levels and all responsibilities are being consulted, are being informed about what the thinking is of the contents of the policy, because this lays the groundwork for them all becoming partners in the implementation of the policy. It's not just, oh, well, two people drafted a policy. Yeah, I know. Okay, but okay, well, it's their thing. It's not my thing. It's their thing. No. For this to really be effective, it needs all staff members have to feel like owners of this policy, and that only happens when, from the very start, they participate. They're being consulted, and it's an inclusive process. It's a process that is transparent, and as we already said, has an empowering quality, okay? Both in what it proposes in terms of content, but again, also in the process of drafting, implementing, and monitoring the policy, okay? At all time being aware in both the process and content of human dignity, respect for human dignity. There should always be an accountability mechanism built in, okay? And we'll come back to that also again. Now, what do we mean by policy monitoring? A very positive way, and again, to maintain this empowering quality is learning by doing. So we monitor the policy. What is it doing? What is it not doing? Who is participating? Who is affected? Who is affected positively? Who is affected negatively? And so on. Not all things can be foreseen in the drafting process, okay? So we learn by doing. We monitor to see what is happening. And if necessary, certain elements in the policy can be adjusted or should be adjusted if particularly certain members of staff are negatively affected or doesn't particularly respect their human dignity or whatever it is, okay? That should always be part of this empowering process, learning by doing. So that's one good reason for monitoring the policy once it has been implemented. The second one is more an external one. That is relevant social media legislation may change. There may be new laws or new dispositions by governments or something like that. And obviously the company policy has to be congruent with any changes in national legislation or local legislation, as the case may be. And when it comes to social media, we're all aware that technology is changing very fast. And so those changes, to the extent that they may also require an adjustment in the policy, also needs to be monitored. Okay? So these are the two main aspects of monitoring and reasons for monitoring. One is the need for policy adjustments over time, and the other one is a process, an empowering process of learning by doing. Now, it's been brought up before that sustainability, that is, it's not enough to draft the policy and say, okay, now it's effective, and then sort of let it live a life of its own, as it were, and so on. And usually it quickly dies, okay? So sustainability means, in this sense, giving a long life to an effective company social media policy, Okay. These are made some of, and you may have some other ideas here as well. These might be some of the elements that may contribute to the sustainability within the company of the policy. We feel at least that the consistent application, as we said before, of these principles of accountability, empowerment, participation, inclusion, and transparency, and so on, are, if they are indeed operationalized effectively, okay, process of doing things, okay, they will contribute to the sustainability of the company. In part, as I already said, because all staff will feel ownership in that policy, not just something that's imposed upon them by a small group of people, whoever they are within the company. Okay. It's also important to ensure that the social media policy is not seen as sort of a separate thing by itself there. It should be firmly integrated and in all staff policy. It should be part and parcel of the package of staff policies. And it's important that responsibilities within the company are assigned to this particular policy. They are identified. It's known by all in the company who are the person or persons responsible for the social media policy. Okay. And we also feel it's important that although that responsibility may be vested in one or a small group of people, okay, that it's well defined what are the responsibility of each of the actors group. And if you see if you have a chance again to glance at the regional framework, policy framework document, we've tried to come up with some ideas, okay? Identifying different actor groups like management or journalists or announcers or celebrities or so on that, and so on. What are their responsibilities in relation to company social policy? To define this well, okay? And so make it clear to each one which is the responsibility that they assume or should assume at least in relation to the sustainability of the company policy, okay? The sharing of information among the different actors within the company, creating a forum where people can express whatever they want, frustrations or positive things, or we learn from each other, and so on, is something, again, that contributes to this idea that all staff are owners of the policy. They have a vested interest in the policy. Creating some sort of a platform could be, I don't know, could be a monthly seminar, or it could be some other media where staff comes together and expresses interests, expresses experiences or frustrations even with the actions of the policy. Okay. And what is generally always true, this is true for all policies. If you can specifically demonstrate what the policy impacts are. And this brings us back again to the policy objectives, okay? Can we monitor the policy objectives? To what extent are they being achieved? What are the positive impacts? What changes do people see, okay, within the company about the use and the posting of social media information, and so on, okay? And of course, if there are any negative effects as well, they need to be brought out and perhaps require an adjustment in the policy, in its content and so on. So these might be some other facts. I don't know if someone would like to share some thoughts about what other elements may be important to assure the sustainability over time of a company social media policy. Any thoughts? Any?
Hi, sorry,
Yes.
hi, I just wanted to go back to something under the response menu. I think it was higher up, where I think one of the points said that it was almost that you could have a disclaimer. And I was wondering if that presents some kind of danger, or if that particular statement has to be said once you're preparing your final document in I don't know the correct language, in consideration of or in adherence of some other policy. Because does a disclaimer then give people some degree of carte blanche to think I can get away with, because I have set a disclaimer saying this is my view, this is not the view of the organization, even though there are other policies that would speak to that. I just, that one just felt a little gray for me.
Maybe Marshall, would you like to respond to that point?
Sure. But I didn't see who was speaking. Was that Diane?
Yes, Marcia.
Yes.
Hi. Okay, yes, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was something on my mind. And I think that's something that really boils down to discussion. When you are preparing the policy for your organization, you really need to sit with staff and see how, get input from everyone who's going to be affected, because I definitely agree that it shouldn't be as simple as saying, my views do not reflect those of the company, because the reality is either some people are going to just gloss over that, see it or not see it, or it is very hard to separate. It's very hard to separate a Ronnie Clark from a Starcom, or an Admiral from a CBC. So for Admiral to post something and say these are not CBC's views, that's all fine and well, is there in writing, but people still link him with the organization. So that's something that comes down to really engaging staff, because this is something else that came up. Some people shared in the surveys that they came to an organization, they were told these are the rules, they weren't consulted, there was no discussion when things were changed, there was no follow-up. So there needs definitely to be buy-in from the staff, and they need to be involved in the process. And you find some kind of middle ground. Everyone isn't going to be happy, but you need to find some kind of middle ground that works. There's not going to be a black or white situation.
Well, Diane, does that more or less address your point?
Yes, it does.
Yes.
You also spoke of the importance of knowing the legislation of the land, the law of the land, as it relates to what you could do. But social media is so open, you know, for want of a better word. It really presents that challenge. But I think you have some incredibly really good points here that could definitely fit right into a policy document. So, you know, we're ready to have a go at it, but you still have to navigate in this space that is social media, where so much is permissible and acceptable.
That's true. And that's a very good point, Diane, because it is new. So it's you're uncharted territory, as they say, and there's not going to be a perfect solution, but at least there's a point where you can start and you can continue. And one of the things we want to do is encourage organizations to go back, revisit their policies, you know, every year, every couple of years. And as things develop and as laws become more clear in the space of social media and digital media, then you can tweak your policies to suit. Over to you, Martin.
Yes, no, I think that's absolutely right. And of course, legislation varies among countries. The technological changes that take place and that are marketed and so on may also vary somewhat among countries and so on. So yes, it definitely is an important element to monitor and to make sure, obviously, that company policies comply or are right in line with any legislation, and also recognize any new developments, new technological developments, which may create new opportunities or which may also create new problems in terms of, using and generating and so on. Yes, please.
Go ahead.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Marsha, I take your point, and Diane, I just wanted to follow up on your question and your comment. I understand what you said, what Marsha said about getting the buy-in from staff. However, how does a company or an institution protect itself from the social media posts of one of its influential staff members? For example, recently we had this situation where, following the Queen's death, one university professor made some disparaging social media post about colonialism and the royal family, etc. And while the university said, I think they said that that was not the position of, while that was not their position, there was a lot of backlash. How does a company protect itself against those situations?
Marsha?
Is that to me? Okay. So, what I was trying to get across in the response to Diane is that there isn't going to be a perfect solution. And one of the things that needs to be done is that you need to have a policy in place that state things clearly. And then when you have new people joining your organization, they're joining knowing that these are the rules and this was in effect. Yeah. I think the challenge comes where you're now going to be trying to implement something and you have people who are used to doing things a particular way. So you need to definitely have these conversations with staff. Just as I would in the surveys with you, ask certain questions, you would have shared feedback. You need to have conversations with staff where management would share what their concerns are, staff would share what their concerns are. Obviously, for management, those concerns would be tied to the company's brand, offending advertisers. And for staff, their concerns would be linked to infringing on their freedom of speech and who they are outside of the station. Yeah. And so you need to have the conversation, and it may go something like, well, we respect that outside of the organization, you're your own person, you have your own social media, but people still are going to link you to us because you are a big part of our brand. So how do we temper, or how do we pay attention to what is said in a way that doesn't reflect poorly on us while still allowing you to say what you have to say? Now, what was interesting that came out in the surveys, it was almost a very clear split down the middle that almost all the journalists I spoke to felt that even outside of the organization, on their personal social media accounts, they still had a responsibility as a journalist to the public. Even apart from the organization, they're a journalist, and in keeping with the tenets of journalism, they had a responsibility as journalists to the public, and so they chose to refrain from certain things. It's not going to be so easy when you're dealing with quote unquote celebrities, and what it boils down to is discussion. There's not going to be a perfect solution. There is going to be pushback. There are going to be people who are going to feel outside of your company, in my hours, you can't tell me what to do, what to say, what to print. And you have to be able to find some kind of medium there that works for everyone. But in terms of people coming in the future, if you have something in place, when they join your organization, they sign their contract, they know that these are the rules, this is what they're signing on to if they're coming to work here. I hope that kind of helps in some way.
Sure.
Okay.
Anyone
Martin?
else would like? Yes, anyone
Hi.
else would like to contribute? Please.
Hi, can I add something here? I shared some really good points there just now because with the journalists here in the newsroom, they understand that they do have a responsibility outside of working hours to also share, facts and not fake news, right? But the thing that we have here at this station is that we also have radio stations. We have an urban radio station, right? And those announcers and presenters, they understand that we are state media, and they understand that on air they have the responsibility to again share factual information. But outside of that, they also need to stay current. They need to keep their fans and their followers entertained. How so finding a line between, they sharing their opinions and sharing their views to keep that momentum with their followers and their fans, and still staying in the in the light where they don't breach any um lines or issues or the policy. It's very difficult for them, in fact, because they need to keep their fans on their side, and they also need to keep their job.
So if
So
I can, oh, sorry, I thought you were finished. Go on.
no, continue.
So I want to jump in here and say this is something that also came up in the surveys. And one of the things that we were toying with was the idea of, and this was one of the survey questions as well, should there be a separate policy, or not a separate policy as such, but one set of rules for journalists and more relaxed rules for entertainers, DJs, talk show hosts, etc. And one of the things that I'm hesitating here, because don't hate me, Diane, because I am going to pick on you. But in my conversation with Diane Fort from CBC in Barbados, I thought it was really interesting. She shared with me how they at present managed it too. They do want to work on it, and they do want to fine tune it, but they have a different way of managing the social media that is connected to the newsroom versus what's connected to radio. And there's a little bit more flexibility with radio, and in terms of how many different gatekeepers there are versus the situation in news. And I just wonder if you could share a little bit about that with us, Diane, because I thought it was really interesting when we were going through the survey. Are you with us, Diane?
Yes, I'm here, Marsha. I was going to let Nicole Collins explain who handles news, how we handle news versus how we handle our radio sites as she deals directly with it. Go ahead, Nicole.
Thanks, Diane. Well, what we have a team specifically assigned to news. They are attached to the newsroom. So all information, all news stories come directly from the newsroom. Then we have another team which is designed for radio and our corporate pages. We have different social media managers for those who then will report to the marketing department. So we kind of streamline it to make sure that in terms of news, the possibility of fake news, any fake news or anything that is not verified doesn't go out and damage the integrity of our news product. So that's how we handle it.
Thank you. And one of the things that, I mean, this may seem obvious to state, but it can't be understated. One of the things that was very clear, especially in speaking with media managers, editors, and so on, is that the checkpoints don't go out the window just because it is social media. It is the same process for social media as you would have with any other news story on any other platform. If it's going out in a newspaper, if it's going out on radio, if it's going out on TV, there are procedures to be followed, and the same applies to social media. I think where the challenge comes now is when people are posting on their personal accounts outside of company time. And that's something that requires discussion with those who are going to be impacted by whatever is decided in the policy. Okay, over to you, Martin.
Okay, thank you. Well, we thought we sort of conclude this by, we have called it, but in the next slides that follow this one, template for drafting a company with social media policy. First of all, let me assure you, what is not meant to be is this is a straitjacket. Okay. What is important is that the policy that is formulated, okay, and implemented and so on, fits, the needs, the identified needs and the challenges and opportunities of a specific company. Okay. So whether you follow this outline or you use another outline, or that in a sense is not important. Okay. What is important is actually that there are very clear rules expressed in the policy. But in general, we thought, some of the things that a policy document would cover is, first of all, its title. And I think it's important that title always includes the company name. In other words, the policy is specific to this company, okay? And another company may have a completely different or a similar policy and so on. So in the title, the policy always includes the name of the company. Then to be followed by a preface or presentation. As you again go back to the regional framework document, you see there is a presentation, and that one is over the signature of the president of CBU. I think the message is important in the sense that a presentation of the policy or preface signed by a high level of officer gives again the message, this is a company-wide policy. This applies to all to whom it is relevant, or parts of it to whom it are relevant, and not just something ramped up by a couple of starry-eyed individual staff members, and it's just sitting out there. This really needs the endorsement from the high-level management in the company. Okay. To give that message that it applies to all staff. Then next, in the next slide, usually a policy document has definitions. In other words, terms that are used once or more in the policy need to be clearly and unambiguously described. That also avoids the need to each time that a particular term comes up to define it again in the text and so on. It becomes just too laborsome to. So upfront there's usually a section of definition of the terms, usually technical terms, but they can also be social terms or cultural terms or political terms even, if you like, okay, that are being used once or more in the whole policy text, okay? Then the following again, a little bit, the document, the regional framework document, the challenges that are faced by the company. And as we already said, it should be the result, okay? The identification of those challenges. And I should actually have included here also opportunities as a result of a participatory and inclusive in-house analysis in which everyone participates, everyone has an opportunity to somehow express their opinion, their experiences, their fears, positive elements, whatever it is that may be relevant to eventually drafting the policy for the company. Okay. Then next, again, we have the policy vision and mission. We already talked about that. What are the long-term expectations of what is sustainably to be achieved in the long run, and what this specific policy is expected to contribute to those long-term achievements. Again, as I said, the vision may also, the achievement of the vision may also depend on other factors that are needed to get there. But we're talking here specifically about the policy and what it is that the policy is expected to contribute to those long-term achievements. Then that we followed, usually in that order, the policy objectives, sorry, okay. Again, following the outline of the regional policy framework. It again lays out clearly how the identified challenges as a result of the analysis, the issues, the problems and opportunities are to be achieved, okay? And it's important that those objectives are described, are written in such a way that their achievement over time can be measured. For instance, it's not enough to say, well, people are more conscious of the need to do something. Well, to measure a change in consciousness is very difficult. It's very thing. But if we say people are to implement certain practices, we can say, okay, before, to what extent were those practices implemented, by whom, by the staff, and so on. And after some time, to what extent are those same practices being implemented, improved, or something like that? That is something that is sort of measurable. It's tangible, okay? So it's important. Excuse me. It's important that the objectives are written in such a way that the progress of those objectives can be measured over time. Then, as before, we said also the rules or the actions to achieve those objectives. Again, very clear and unambiguous terms, using common language that can be understood by all. And if it contains certain technical terms, those are then defined in the previous section of definition of the policy document. Next, responsibilities. Again, this is very important. The responsibility. Sorry. I get all emotional about this. Responsibility of the different actors group within the company. Responsibility for implementation, responsibility for adherence to the rules and principles of the policy. Specific plans for a policy implementation. This is something often overlooked. Somehow, well, there is a document now, and you know, everybody contributed something, and so now we have a policy implemented. No, it needs to be, how is the policy to be implemented? How are each and all actors in the company going to be aware of it, be aware of the responsibility that are assigned to the group to which they belong? When does the policy go in effect? Is it immediate? Is it next week? It's with the new calendar year, okay? And to the extent that implementation also requires resources, those should also be defined. We already said earlier, it will require some staff time, in other words, committed staff time, okay? But also could take, we need some staff training. Is it necessary for people to fully understand what are the responsibilities for the implementation of the policy? Through some additional training, and obviously resources are needed for that too, if the answer is yes. Then finally, to come to the monitoring, as we said earlier, okay, it should be very clear. First of all, we said monitoring at 2 levels inside the company. Remember the learning by doing and so on. Who is responsible in the company for doing that? What exactly is going to be monitored? Some companies may, for instance, want to monitor staff adherence to the rules, okay? And some companies may opt to even say there are certain sanctions for people who systematically ignore the rules or systematically do not assume the responsibilities that were assigned to the group the actor group to which they belong. Okay. If there are to be sanctions, which is a decision, it's up to each individual company, of course. It should also be very clear under what conditions those sanctions will be applied. Be very transparent about this so that people know if I do this, this, and this, I may be subject to this and these sanctions, okay? But it needs to be very transparent and very upfront and not something, oh, well, you always systematically ignore the rules. So, well, I think I'm going to fire you or something like that. No. What are the sanctions and under what condition will a sanction or a specific sanction be applied? This needs to be very transparent and very upfront. And then we said the second level for monitoring is, again, in relation to changes in relevant legislation and technology. But also, who is responsible for doing this monitoring? Who is assigned that responsibility within the company? And who's responsible to bring to the agenda, as it were, the needs for policy adjustments if certain changes in legislation are implemented at the national or local level, or if some significant technological developments have taken place that affect the use of social media for information or posting as a source of information and so on. So again, important to spell out, to be as much upfront, too much clear about these things. I think is important. I think it will contribute to the sustainability of the company, and it's only fair to all who work within the company to exactly know what they are responsible for and can be held responsible for, and so on. So hopefully this may provide you some guidance as to if your company decides indeed to draft, implement, and then hopefully also monitor a company social policy. It's not all of the answer. I'm sure that in discussions also, as Marcia said, continuous discussion, internal discussion among all, very participatory and exclusive. Other elements will come up that are important and that should be incorporated. And as we know, company policies, it's not a question of one size fits all. Okay, it's very much custom made, if you like. So with this, Marcia and I, we personally thank you for your participation. I don't know if anyone would like to make additional comments or points of view or express any frustrations or whatever you wish. We invite you to do so now.
Shannon has his hand raised.
Okay, absolutely.
Right. So going back to the point where you said plans for monitoring adherence, I could understand the adherence and the monitoring of the social media platforms from the company side. But how do we monitor personal pages, right? When it comes to, let's say, Facebook, where you have public settings and you have private settings, right? If I, as an employee, share a post, let's say my personal opinion, privately to my friends, right? That's how does the company deal with something like that? Because that's private, right? And I understand it's social media, but it's not public. So I've had a situation where an employee here said, well, I posted privately to my friends. And of course, one of those friends screenshot it and send it internally. But it was private. How do we monitor those channels when settings allow employees to make comments privately amongst them friends?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
That's a very good question. And again, there's going to be no perfect solution. There are going to be challenges. I think in a situation like that, you start to enter into the territory of really limiting people's free speech. If people, and again, this is my personal opinion, yeah. If people are posting privately and just sharing with friends, now, I could say I'm just sharing with my friends on Facebook. My Facebook is the limit is 5,000. You know what I mean? And they're not my friends. They're just people who used to see me on TV. So I think depending on the company and what the concerns are, your policy needs to address areas like that. And there's not going to be one solution that works for every company or even every country, because in some situations you have, I remember in the surveys, one person said, well, everybody knows everybody. I mean, it is almost to that extent in Barbados. I'm sure that's not the case in Trinidad and Jamaica, but we're small, you know, we're small land masses. And when you go to like Anguilla, I think it was in Anguilla, and the person I spoke with, everyone knows everyone. So I can't even think I'm going to post things privately or post things under a pseudonym, because people figure out who it is. So you have to, and this is the whole idea of why we have a framework that stations then use, as opposed to having a policy and saying, hey, each station has to adopt this policy, because you need to be able to look at the framework, and a framework is such, it is a guidance document. It guides you in the development of your own policy, and your policy needs to reflect the unique situations of your country, of your station, of your culture. And you may even find that within a country, two different types of policies are needed based on the type of station you are and the type of content you put out. Yeah. So there needs to be discussion, and there needs to be the involvement of staff, and there needs to be some solution that's reached that works for everyone, that is not polarizing. No one's going to completely agree with everything, but we need to have some middle that's not polarizing.
And
Hi,
I think
Martha.
there may be, sorry, someone else have the hand up?
Yeah, yes, I just wanted to say that I do agree with what Marcia just said. And as I sat and I listened to the presentation, one of the things that jumped out to me was the fact that it's media personnel, the actor groups, and I do believe that different organizations will have different policies, but I am seeing here that even in terms of our organization, where you can have sales reps and marketing persons added to your actor group, or having a separate policy for those persons, because at the end of the day, those persons still represent your brand, and anything that they can post can negatively impact the brand. It can impact the integrity of the brand. Let's say a sales rep goes down to XYZ and has lunch, and then the lunch is awful, and they go and they post online, well, XYZ's lunch is awful, but XYZ is one of the company's customers, their clients, their advertisers. That can negatively impact the relationship between the company and the client. So I'm seeing here that, and I do agree that there may be a need for two different types of policies in terms of those for those media persons, and also for persons who interact with the public as well on behalf of the company.
Yes, this is true, Nicole. One policy, but different rules that apply to the different actor groups, because like you said, within any one organization, you're going to have different people who represent the organization, but who carry different weight in terms of the following they have and how people adhere to or buy into what they say. So if, again, I go back to Admiral turns on the microphone on, let's say he has a personal podcast, and he turns on his microphone and he says something that is not in keeping with how the corporation feels about an issue, you know, that's different to, let's say, someone who works behind the camera having a podcast and doing that, you know? So those are things that have to be taken into consideration. There are going to be a lot of nuanced things you have to deal with, but it needs conversation. It needs conversation, and there will be no perfect solution. But the key is just have a starting point. And as you go through the process and as you learn and as you experience different situations, you can go back to that starting point and tweak it and improve on it year after year. And technically, that's how the law works, you know?
Thank you, Marshall. Is there anyone else who would like to contribute something? I would sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, yes, I just want to say I appreciated this session, and we really have to, there's so many different facets to consider, and we really do need to put our minds to it, put our heads to it, because, we're talking about staff and employees as well, but there are some of us who are also, to whom it will apply, even as those of us in senior positions. You spoke just now, Marsha, about giving an example about Admiral having a private podcast, but even that could be deemed as somewhat of a conflict of interest, because you're in radio, you're in media, yet you have a personal brand doing the same thing or similarly to what you would be doing in radio. So, it really does take some kind of a navigation, and I appreciate the points about involving staff, because that is important. The buy-in for staff members is very important, and it will be a road. Change is inevitable, and people respond differently to change, and we just need to be wise in how we handle it and how we go forth. So, thank you.
Thank you for that.
I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this, because here in Guyana, NCN State Media, we do have a social media policy, but it's from since 2015, so it would definitely need updating. And I think keeping the objectives in mind of your social media policy would go a long way in terms of having the staff know that this is not just to police their speech online, but to safeguard the company's image, to ensure profitability. And at the end of the day, it's the company or the organization where we all sing for our supper. So I think once they understand that, this is also helping you to avoid any litigation or safeguarding the company, they would probably have more buy-in. And also in Guyana, we have cyberbullying laws that were recently passed. And I mean, I could take you to court for causing emotional distress. And people have been abusing that law in some instances. And I think things like that could be included in our social media policy. And so I think it's great for us to just keep reviewing once we have a document already, or even when drafting a new one. So I appreciate the insight. And I think that's something that could be taken to management to update our own policy.
Thanks, Andrea. I just want to jump in a second, Martin, and tap back on something Krista J said, because this was something that was discussed in this survey as well, which is one, in drafting your policy, obviously it needs to align with the company's rules, yeah? And two is getting the balance right in terms of and again, this may differ from company to company. Krista J mentioned in the case where someone works for a company as an on-air personality and then they have their private podcast or a private following, is that a conflict of interest? Very good question. Some companies may decide that's the case, and some companies may decide it's to their benefit because this person is such a big celebrity on their own. And the reality is sometimes that's why some stations seek out certain persons, not because of their degree in journalism or their degree in DJing, but because they have a following and they are able to bring that following to the company. So what you don't want to do is then infringe upon the one thing that could be helping the company to grow as well, but at the same time, so striking the balance so that that person does not become so big when I say big, I mean a law unto themselves, that it causes a problem for the company. So getting the balance, and again, it's never going to be one thing that suits every company. You have to know your staff, you have to know your country, your people, your culture, and work from there, and engage everyone in the organization and come up with something that's tailor-made for you, for your organization.
Thank you, Marshall, because you just reminded me of a point I was going to make earlier. When I think of even the mainstream media in the States, right? I mean, obviously we're smaller countries, but I think of the Christiane Amanpours and the Don Lemons and those on MSNBC, etc. They say, follow me at Christiane Amanpour.
Yes.
But then it's a case of building the personality as well as the media house. So it's a win-win, and I've always been interested in knowing what it is that they do. What is their policy? What is involved? What are the details? What are the clauses? Because it clearly is working for them. Christiane has been with CNN for decades, I believe. And she directs on CNN. She directs people to her personal page, as does Don Lemon and everybody else. But maybe that's something that we can consider in striking the balance, as you mentioned. Yeah, it's a win-win for both parties.
This is true, and one thing is clear: better believe that when Christiane goes to CNN, when Don Lemon goes to CNN, they have certain things they agree to in their contract. So it's very clear up front, Yes, Diane, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to totally support what Krista J is saying. And I quite agree, but you have to understand sometimes the strength of the personalities for the brand. So by them pushing their own social media and allowing people to follow them and people knowing that they're associated with your organization, it can redound to the benefit of the organization. So as you said, it's really just to have it spelled out. These are the terms, these are the references, this is what you can or cannot do, and make sure that everybody wins, because there are brands within themselves, within your brand, the ambit of your corporate brands as well. So it's very interesting.
Correct. And one of the things that you will notice like when you speak about the Christiane Amanpours and Don Lemons and Anderson Coopers and so on, they remain and they understand their responsibility, not just to journalism, but to CNN outside of their office hours. They don't ever switch off. Now, whether something like that is going to work to that extent here in the Caribbean, I don't know. You have to, again, that's something you have to feel out individually, country to country, station to station. But America is a very different, on the one hand, they very much value freedom of speech. But on the other hand, they also have this patriotism that ties into the organization they work for. And people tend to, for lack of a better term, fall into place. I didn't want to use that term, but I'm sure you understand what I mean, because you will never go on Christiane's or Anderson's social media and see something that is not in keeping with CNN's brand. Yeah. And I'm sure they probably have other accounts under pseudonyms where they would post things that are not in keeping with CNN's brand, but their name is a brand, and it becomes part of the brand that is CNN. And that's why that works for them. I don't know that the same would work. It's a culture we would have to build. Let me just say that.
Diane still has her hand up.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Hi, Diane. Is that a legacy hand or another comment?
I think she's mute.
I'm sorry. I'll take it down. Sorry, that's an error.
That's okay. That's all right.
Okay, Shannon has his hand up.
Yes. Yes, sorry. Okay, final question. Leading on to that, to what Masha, what we were saying, when the American journalists and reporters, they tend to stay with the guidelines and stay committed and loyal to their organization. What are your views on organizations creating profiles for these personalities and managing it on their behalf as if it were the reporter's own instead of their personal pages?
So personally, I have a problem with that and the way it was phrased, because I feel if the organization creates the page and the organization manages it, then that's not the individual's viewpoint. And that to me is crossing into some very treacherous territory. So there needs to be agreement where the individual is saying, okay, yeah, this is my view, because now you don't want to have the reverse where the organization is posting things that are not in keeping with the individual's view. So I think that the individual can manage their social, or have someone at the organization manage it with their agreement, but that it needs to reflect them. It needs to reflect them, because we can't just have this monolith that it's just TTT Limited, you know. They're the individuals who help to make up TTT Limited. And because it's a diverse society, people are going to have different views, and those views should be expressed within certain limits. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah,
All
it does.
right.
Thanks.
You're welcome. All right, I think that about wraps it up. I don't think anyone else is there. Oh, wait, there's a comment. I think journalists have a better understanding of defamation and therefore may be given more leeway to develop their personal brands. Thank you very much, Rashida. I think that that's true. I think that there's nothing wrong with having DJs and so on develop their personal brands, but with guidance that it ensures that they don't bring the company into disrepute. Yeah. All righty. I think that about sums it up. Thank you guys so much for being here today and for your contributions. I really enjoyed how interactive the session is, because I know sometimes these things can be intimidating when you're speaking to a screen and people tend to shy away from speaking, but that was definitely not the case today. And I also noticed that you guys came prepared because you read the framework and you were able to refer to it. So thank you so very much. I'm very appreciative of that. And I know Dr. Inmek is as well. I'm going to hand over to him to have the final word.
Thank you, Marsha. I can only echo your sentiments. I'm also very grateful for all the contributions, the interest. And of course, I hope that this has some impact in terms of a process that now starts in at least some of the companies to draft their policies. I think an important point was made. Someone who said, well, yeah, we have already a policy, but it needs changing, it needs adapting and so on. And that's a very good point. Obviously, if there's already something in place, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. Build on what you have and see where changes are needed and where it can be strengthened to be more effective, and learn from the experience so far as to what to do next, so on. Okay, so again, it's been a pleasure. Who knows? Maybe one day I'll have a chance to meet at least some of you in the Caribbean. Thank you very much. It was great.
Thank you. I hope I don't put you on the spot by saying this, Martin, but Dr. Emmett will be in Barbados in December, November, December?
December and January.
December and January. So I am sure that the opportunity will be there to meet him if you wish to. And I'm sure a meeting and a networking would be useful. And he has years of expertise, having worked with United Nations at World Food Program. I always mix up World Food Program and Food and Agriculture Organization. It was FAO.
FAO and UNICEF, yes, and other organizations, yes.
Awesome. So lots of experience there to draw on and to benefit from. all and in the area of policy development. I think someone wanted to say something just now. Okay.
Well, I wanted to know if he's sending for us to come meet in December.
If he's what? Sending for
if you send in, bringing us to Barbados to meet him.
Oh, well, that will be beneficial to those who are here in Barbados, but for those of you who are not, he'll be a little bit closer because he's in. Are you in Rome right now, Martin, or Portugal?
I'm not. I'm in Italy, but not in Rome. In a place called Ascoli Piceno.
Okay, awesome. So he gets to travel all over the world. I'm very jealous. One thing I wanted to add.
We could go there, you know.
I know, right?
I'm sure he'd be happy to have you there. If you think there's anyone in your organization who may benefit from this session or be interested in this session, we are having another one on Thursday, same time. And what you can do is you can reach out to me for the link to the Thursday session. Same session, but we had it on 2 separate days to accommodate persons who may find one day to be more convenient than the other. All right?
Thank you.
Awesome.
You're
welcome. All right, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Marsha, can you stay on for a little while?
Yes, I'm going to stay on. I'm going to stay on.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye. Have a good day.
Same to you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.